Welcome to Softly Curious. This is a quiet space designed for slow attention and unforced thinking. Nothing here asks you to stay alert, and nothing tries to impress you with speed. You can listen while your thoughts remain awake, or while they gradually soften and drift. The rhythm is steady, the tone is calm, and the subject waiting for us tonight is something so familiar that it often escapes examination. Books have been part of human life for so long that they feel natural, almost inevitable, as if they were always meant to exist exactly as they do. Most people believe they know what a book is. They recognize its shape, its weight, the way it opens and closes, the way it occupies space on a shelf or a table. But familiarity creates a kind of blindness. When an object becomes ordinary, its complexity disappears behind habit. A book seems simple because it works so well. It performs its function quietly, without requiring explanation, and that silence hides how deliberate its design actually is. To understand books properly, it is necessary to step back from stories, authors, genres, and meanings, and instead look at the book itself as an invention. A book is not merely a collection of words. It is not defined by the story it tells or the information it contains. Those elements can exist elsewhere, in speech, memory, or digital form. What makes a book distinct is its structure. A book is a fixed sequence of information arranged to be accessed gradually over time, allowing a reader to pause, return, skip, or linger without losing coherence. This quality separates books from almost every other medium humans have created. Spoken language unfolds once and vanishes. Visual signals demand immediate interpretation. A book, by contrast, waits. This waiting is not passive. It is one of the book's most powerful characteristics. A book does not demand attention at a specific moment. It does not expire if ignored. It allows knowledge to exist independently of urgency. This is why books became essential long before they became common. Early human societies developed writing for accounting, administration, and record-keeping, but those early texts were not books. They were fragments, lists, and inscriptions, designed to capture information briefly and precisely. The book emerged only when humans needed a way to preserve extended thought. Extended thought requires continuity. It assumes that ideas unfold across time, not in a single glance. This assumption may seem obvious today, but it represents a significant shift in how humans related to knowledge. A book assumes patience from both the writer and the reader. It assumes that someone will return to the text repeatedly, building understanding layer by layer. This is why the earliest book-like forms struggled to support complex ideas. Clay tablets were durable, but cumbersome, discouraging long narratives. Papyrus scrolls allowed length, but imposed strict linearity. You could move forward or backward, but not easily, and not without losing your place. The transition from scroll to codex marked a quiet revolution. The codex, with pages bound along one edge, allowed information to be accessed non-linearly. Readers could flip, compare, annotate, and revisit sections with ease. Margins appeared not as decoration, but as cognitive space, allowing thoughts to interact with the text. Chapters and sections emerged not to organize content aesthetically, but to align with human attention. The modern book format did not simply store ideas. It shaped how ideas were constructed, taught, and remembered. This shaping effect is often underestimated. The physical form of a book influences how information is perceived. The size of a page limits how much text can appear at once, guiding reading speed. The thickness of a volume creates expectations about difficulty and depth. Even the act of turning a page introduces a pause, a moment of transition that mirrors mental processing. Books slow thinking without forcing it. They create a rhythm that matches the human mind more closely than almost any other medium. Silence plays a crucial role in this process. Reading removes sound from learning unless the reader supplies it internally. This silence reduces competition for attention. There are no sudden changes in volume, no external cues demanding reaction. Ideas enter the mind quietly and remain there until the reader moves on. This is why books are particularly effective for complex or abstract subjects. They allow concepts to be revisited without pressure, encouraging understanding rather than reaction. Because of this, books became trusted tools in domains where accuracy mattered more than immediacy. Legal systems relied on written codes because spoken rules could change. Scientific traditions depended on texts that could be examined repeatedly. Philosophical arguments required stability, not performance. A book resists alteration. Once written, it holds its position. That resistance creates accountability, but it also creates vulnerability. Errors persist. Bias remains visible. A book cannot adapt itself to each reader. It must stand on its own. This fixed nature of books creates an illusion of permanence. A bound volume feels solid, reliable, and enduring. But books are fragile in ways that are easy to overlook. Materials decay. Ink fades. Paper yellows and weakens. Languages shift, turning once clear sentences into puzzles. Context disappears, leaving ideas stranded without explanation. Many books that once shaped entire civilizations are now unreadable without specialized training. Others survive only in fragments, preserved through quotation by later writers who misunderstood parts of what they saved. In this way, a book is not a guarantee of survival. It is an attempt at resistance, an attempt to slow loss, not eliminate it. This is why books often contain repetition, clarification, and structure. These features are not stylistic flaws. They are defensive strategies. Writers repeat ideas because they know memory fails. They explain concepts multiple ways because interpretation shifts. The book anticipates forgetting and tries, gently, to push back. Over time, books became more than practical tools. They turned into symbols of continuity. Libraries emerged not only as storage spaces, but as cultural anchors. To gather books in one place was to suggest order, memory, and stability. Even today, a room filled with books feels different, regardless of whether they are ever opened. Their presence alone implies thought, patience, and accumulated time. This psychological effect is not accidental. It reflects centuries of association between books and authority, learning, and permanence. One of the most unusual qualities of books is their tolerance for delay. A book can wait decades before being read and still function exactly as intended. This delayed usefulness is rare among human inventions. Most tools lose value if left unused. Books do not. Their purpose exists in potential rather than activation. They can remain silent until the right moment, the right reader, or the right question appears. This makes books uniquely compatible with human life, which is itself uneven and unpredictable. It is also why books survive across generations. A book does not require its creator to be present. It does not require explanation beyond what it contains. It does not change its message to suit the moment. It waits. This waiting creates a strange intimacy between writer and reader, separated by time, but connected through structure. The book becomes a meeting place rather than a message. When we strip away genre, content, and reputation, what remains is an object designed to preserve complexity without demanding urgency. This is the quiet genius of books. They do not compete with attention. They accept partial engagement. A reader can stop halfway through, return months later, and continue without penalty. Few other forms of knowledge allow this kind of relationship. Digital media favors immediacy. Spoken language depends on presence. Books accept interruption. This acceptance changes how humans think. Long-form reasoning, sustained argument, and layered storytelling all depend on the book's ability to hold information steady over time. Without books, many forms of knowledge would collapse into fragments. The book allows ideas to build upon themselves. It enables thought to stretch beyond memory's limits. In doing so, it extends the human mind outward into physical space. This extension is not neutral. Books influence what is remembered and what is forgotten. They privilege certain voices over others. They preserve some ideas while allowing others to vanish. Every book represents a choice, not only in what it includes, but in what it excludes. The existence of a book does not mean truth has been captured. It means a version has survived. Understanding this is essential to understanding books honestly. As we continue exploring this subject, it becomes clear that books are not passive containers waiting to be filled. They are active systems shaped by centuries of experimentation. Their form reflects deep negotiations between memory, attention, time, and power. Every margin, every chapter, every binding choice carries history within it. To hold a book is to hold the residue of countless decisions made by people trying to keep ideas alive. For now, it is enough to recognize this quieter truth. A book is not simply something to be read. It is something designed to remain, to endure pauses, to tolerate misunderstanding, to wait for the next mind that will open it, not knowing exactly what it will become in that encounter. That patience may be the most important lesson books have ever offered, without needing to say it aloud. If books are systems rather than simple objects, then one of the most overlooked aspects of their design is how deliberately they manage human attention. A book never assumes that a reader will arrive fully prepared. It anticipates distraction, fatigue, hesitation, even boredom. This is why introductions exist, why ideas are often framed before they are explained, and why conclusions echo earlier thoughts. These structural choices are not rhetorical flourishes. They are cognitive accommodations built into the object itself. A book accepts the imperfect reader and adjusts accordingly, offering multiple entry points rather than a single demand for understanding. This accommodation extends to time as well. Books are not designed to be consumed in one uninterrupted moment. They expect interruption. A reader may close a book mid-thought, place a marker between pages, and return days or even years later. The book remains unchanged, holding its position patiently. This quality allows books to stretch across human life in a way few other mediums can. A single volume can be encountered at different ages, under different circumstances, and produce entirely different meanings without altering a single word. Another quiet feature of books is their resistance to immediacy. Unlike conversation or broadcast media, books do not react. They do not respond to emotion, disagreement, or urgency. This one-sidedness may seem like a limitation, but it is precisely what allows books to support slow reasoning. A reader can argue internally, pause, reread, and reconsider without being pushed forward. The book does not escalate. It does not persuade through volume or repetition. It simply remains available, creating space for thought rather than filling it. This stability, however, introduces an important consequence. Because books do not change in response to readers, interpretation shifts onto the reader entirely. Meaning is not delivered. It is constructed. Two people can read the same book and leave with incompatible conclusions, both supported by the text. This is not a flaw in books, but a feature of their design. By fixing the words and releasing control over interpretation, books allow ideas to interact freely with different minds. This is why books can survive ideological change, even when their original context disappears. The physical constraints of books also shape what kinds of ideas they carry. Long arguments, detailed explanations, and layered narratives thrive in book form because they benefit from space. Compression weakens them. A book does not need to be brief, and this lack of pressure allows complexity to remain intact. At the same time, physical limits still exist. Pages cost resources. Binding has limits. These constraints force choices. What is included must justify the space it occupies. In this way, books encourage deliberation not only in reading, but in writing. Over centuries, this deliberation influenced how knowledge itself was organized. Disciplines emerged alongside books, not independently of them. Science developed conventions for citing sources because books made comparison possible. History adopted chronology because books allowed sequences to be preserved. Philosophy embraced extended argument because books could sustain it. The book did not merely record these fields. It helped shape their internal logic. Knowledge adapted itself to the medium that carried it. Books are not neutral objects when it comes to power. Throughout history, the ability to produce, distribute, and preserve them has been unevenly controlled, turning access to books into a signal of authority and belonging. Whoever shaped texts often shaped memory itself, which is why books have been guarded, limited, copied in secret, or deliberately destroyed. And yet, despite this hidden influence, books remain modest in form. They do not announce their importance or demand attention. They wait quietly, open to neglect and misunderstanding, while slowly shaping how people think, remember, and imagine. Their strength lies in patience, working silently across time, one reader at a time. Books did not arrive in the world fully formed. They were not invented once and then simply copied. The way books look today is the result of centuries of trial, constraint, compromise, and quiet correction. Every detail that now feels obvious was once undecided. Size, shape, orientation, sequence, spacing, and even silence were questions before they became conventions. To understand books deeply, it is necessary to understand why they look the way they do, not as an aesthetic preference, but as a response to very specific human and material limits. The earliest attempts to fix knowledge into a durable form were shaped less by creativity than by necessity. When writing first emerged, it did so as a tool of control and coordination. Accounting records, legal statements, inventories, and decrees were written to be precise, not reflective. These texts were short because memory still carried most of the burden. Rating supported memory rather than replacing it. The idea that thought itself could live outside the mind for extended periods came later, and when it did, it required new solutions. Materials imposed the first set of rules. Clay, stone, and metal were durable but inflexible. They resisted revision and discouraged length. Writing on these surfaces forced compression. Ideas had to be brief, repetitive, and formulaic. This shaped early knowledge into rigid forms, suitable for rules and records, but not for exploration. The transition to softer materials, such as papyrus and parchment, allowed text to expand, but introduced new problems. These surfaces were lighter and more flexible, but also more fragile. They could carry longer narratives, but demanded protection. The scroll was one of the first solutions to this challenge. It allowed text to extend continuously, preserving order and direction. But the scroll enforced a particular way of thinking. Information could only be accessed sequentially. Comparison was difficult. Reference was awkward. The physical act of unrolling and re-rolling discouraged interruption. This made scrolls effective for ritual, storytelling, and proclamation, but inefficient for analysis. Knowledge flowed forward, not inward. The shift away from the scroll was not immediate, and it was not universal. For centuries, different cultures maintained different formats based on habit, availability, and purpose. The form we now recognize as a book emerged slowly, shaped by use rather than design. The Codex, with pages bound along one side, introduced a radical change that did not announce itself as such. It simply solved several small problems at once. Pages could be opened at any point. Sections could be compared. Text could be navigated rather than followed. This change had consequences beyond convenience. Once information could be accessed non-linearly, writing itself began to change. Authors could assume return. They could refer backward and forward. Arguments could branch and reconnect. The page became a unit of thought rather than just a surface. Margins appeared not as decoration, but as thinking space. Readers could respond to the text without altering it, creating a dialogue across time. The physical proportions of books were shaped by the human body long before ergonomics became a concept. The size of a page reflects what hands can hold comfortably and what eyes can scan without strain. Oversized books existed, but they were anchored to tables and lecterns, signaling authority and permanence rather than intimacy. Smaller books encouraged private reading, portability, and repetition. Over time, these associations became embedded in cultural expectations. Size began to imply purpose. Orientation followed similar logic. Vertical text arrangements matched how scrolls were unrolled, while horizontal arrangements emerged alongside codices. Direction of reading was influenced by writing systems, but also by binding. The position of the spine determined how pages were turned and how the eye moved across the surface. These choices were not neutral. They shaped reading speed, emphasis, and even memory retention. Once standardized, they became invisible. The arrival of printing did not immediately standardize books. Early printed texts often mimicked handwritten manuscripts so closely that readers struggled to distinguish them. This was intentional. New technology had to appear familiar to be trusted. Decorative initials, irregular spacing, and even deliberate imperfections were preserved to reassure readers that nothing essential had changed. Printing succeeded not by breaking with the past, but by disguising itself as continuity. What printing truly altered was not appearance, but consistency. For the first time, identical texts could circulate widely without relying on individual scribes. This fixed errors as well as truths. Variations diminished. Authority increased. A printed book suggested stability, even when the ideas inside were controversial. This shift altered how knowledge was evaluated. Consistency became a proxy for reliability. Repetition became evidence of truth. Typography evolved in response to these pressures. Letter forms were designed for speed of recognition, not beauty. Spacing between lines and words emerged gradually as readers demanded relief from visual density. Punctuation expanded not as grammatical theory, but as navigational aid. These elements guided the eye and shaped comprehension. They were responses to fatigue, confusion, and misreading. Over time, they became rules. Binding methods also reflect changing priorities. Early bindings were functional, designed to protect pages rather than present them. As books became more common, bindings began to signal ownership, value, and status. Leather, cloth, and ornamentation turned books into objects of display as well as use. This shift affected how books were treated. They became possessions rather than tools, heirlooms rather than references. Despite these changes, one principle remained constant. Books were designed to slow information down. Printing accelerated production, but reading remained deliberate. A book does not force speed. It resists skimming by design. Even when read quickly, it requires physical engagement. Pages must be turned. Progress must be acknowledged. This friction is not accidental. It protects meaning from being consumed too easily. The mystery of books lies partly in this resistance. They appear simple, yet embody layers of adaptation. Every design choice reflects a compromise between efficiency and endurance. Too dense, and readers abandon them. Too loose, and meaning dissolves. Books occupy a narrow balance between effort and reward. This balance has been refined over centuries, often without conscious intention. What we inherit today is not the perfect form of a book, but the most survivable one. Many alternatives were tried and abandoned. Folded texts, continuous sheets, modular formats, and experimental bindings appeared and vanished. The forms that remained did so because they aligned best with human limits. Books survived by fitting us, not by transforming us. Books are not finished objects shaped by pure logic, but the result of long, uneven adaptation. Their familiar form emerged through repeated trial under material limits, human fatigue, and practical use, not through ideal design. Page size, margins, and reading rhythm developed as responses to error, strain, and confusion, while unsuccessful formats quietly disappeared. What survives today is a structure that fits human attention just well enough to endure, carrying not only written content, but embedded knowledge about how people read, pause, remember, and return over time. Long before printing became associated with speed and mass production, it was already quietly shaping how knowledge survived. One of the earliest known examples of a printed book is the Diamond Sutra, dated to the year 868 and discovered in Dunhuang, China. Produced using woodblock printing, it demonstrates that the idea of reproducing long texts mechanically existed centuries before Europe encountered the concept. What matters here is not only its age, but the fact that it already assumes an audience beyond a single moment or place. Woodblock printing flourished in China largely because of practical needs rather than artistic ambition. Large bureaucratic systems required standardized texts, while Buddhist traditions encouraged the reproduction of sutras as an act of devotion. Printing, in this context, was not about originality, but about preservation and consistency. The same text, repeated carefully, gained spiritual and administrative authority precisely because it did not change. In East Asia, printing did not immediately lead to books becoming personal objects. Many early printed texts were stored in temples or government centers rather than private homes. This shaped their physical form. Large formats, dense text, and minimal spacing reflected collective use rather than individual comfort. Reading was often public, ritualized, or supervised, reducing the need for navigational aids like chapters or indexes. A very different pressure shaped books in Europe. By the early 15th century, manuscript culture had reached its limits. Copying texts by hand was slow, inconsistent, and expensive. When Johannes Gutenberg introduced movable metal type around the 1450s in Mainz, the true innovation was not printing itself, but repeatability. Individual letters could be reused, rearranged, and standardized, allowing the same page to appear hundreds of times with minimal variation. One of the earliest and most influential results of this system was the Gutenberg Bible, printed around 1455. Its importance lies not only in religious content, but in visual strategy. The layout deliberately imitated handwritten manuscripts, complete with decorative initials added by hand. Early readers trusted familiarity more than novelty. The book had to look old in order to be accepted as legitimate. As printing spread across Europe, cities such as Venice, Paris, and Antwerp became major centers of book production. Venice, in particular, benefited from trade routes and a multilingual population. Printers like Aldus Manutius began experimenting with smaller formats, producing portable books that could be read privately. This shift helped normalize silent reading and changed how individuals interacted with text. Standardization followed slowly. Page numbers, tables of contents, and consistent chapter divisions were not immediate features of printed books. They emerged as readers demanded better navigation. Confusion, not theory, drove innovation. When readers got lost, printers adjusted. When texts became longer, structure followed. The modern book is the cumulative result of reader frustration turned into design. Typography also evolved under pressure. Early printed letters mimicked handwriting, but over time, clearer letter forms proved more efficient. Spacing between words, once optional, became essential for speed and comprehension. Punctuation expanded not as a grammatical system, but as a visual guide for breath, pause, and emphasis. Reading silently required different signals than reading aloud. By the 17th century, Books had become deeply entangled with authority. Scientific works, legal codes, and philosophical texts gained power through print because they could be cited, compared, and preserved. Errors no longer disappeared quietly. They spread. At the same time, censorship intensified. Books were banned, burned, or indexed because fixed text was harder to control than speech. What emerges from this history is not a single invention moment, but a layered transformation. Printing did not create books. It froze certain versions of them in place. It rewarded clarity, punished ambiguity, and favored ideas that could survive repetition. The book's modern form is not neutral. It reflects centuries of negotiation between technology, power, belief, and the limits of human attention. And this negotiation is not finished. The form that once emerged from clay, parchment, and metal continues to adapt. What remains constant is the underlying logic established long ago. Knowledge that hopes to survive must learn how to fit both the material world and the human mind, quietly and without insistence. Once a book is written, its real journey begins. Writing does not guarantee survival, and publication does not secure memory. Most books disappear quietly, without scandal or ceremony. They are lost not because they lack value, but because survival requires conditions that ideas alone cannot provide. Time is selective, and books are exposed to it more directly than most human creations. They rely on fragile materials, vulnerable institutions, and continuous human interest. When any one of these breaks, the text begins to slip away. One of the most persistent myths about books is that preservation is automatic. The existence of writing creates an illusion of permanence, as if fixing words on a surface freezes them in history. In reality, writing only slows disappearance. Early texts survived not because they were written, but because they were copied. A book that was not reproduced was already in danger, regardless of its importance. This is why repetition, not originality, determined survival for much of human history. Before printing, copying was manual and imperfect. Every handwritten reproduction introduced small changes. Letters were misread, lines skipped, words altered to fit unfamiliar grammar or belief. Over time, these changes accumulated. What readers encountered centuries later was rarely identical to what the author originally composed. This is not speculation, but a documented reality visible in surviving manuscripts. Textual variation is not an exception. It is the norm. A clear example can be seen in ancient Greek literature. The epics attributed to Homer existed for centuries as oral performances before they were written down, and even then, no single authoritative version existed. What survives today is the result of generations of copying, editing, and selection. Certain passages stabilized, others shifted, and some disappeared entirely. The text endured, but not in a fixed form. Survival required flexibility. Flexibility, however, did not protect all texts. Entire libraries vanished, taking thousands of works with them. The most famous symbol of this loss is the Library of Alexandria, which functioned not as a single building, but as a long-term collection effort. Its importance lies not only in what it held, but in what its disappearance represents. When a center of copying collapses, texts vanish even if copies once existed. Loss is often institutional before it is material. Not all destruction was accidental. Books were also removed deliberately, often because they challenged power, belief, or social order. Yet even deliberate destruction rarely erased texts completely. Some works survived because they were copied elsewhere, translated into another language, or embedded within commentaries. Survival sometimes depended on being misunderstood or repurposed. A text that lost its original meaning could still persist as a reference, a quotation, or a fragment. Fragments are one of the quiet realities of book history. Many ancient works are known only through quotations preserved by later authors. The original books are gone, but their shadows remain. This creates a distorted picture of the past. What we read today often reflects the interests of those who copied, not those who wrote. Books did not survive because they were complete, but because they were useful to someone else at a later time. Translation played a critical role in this process. When texts moved between languages, they changed form and emphasis. Meaning shifted to fit new cultural frameworks. In the 9th century, scholars such as Al-Kindi worked within translation movements that preserved Greek scientific and philosophical texts by rendering them into Arabic. These translations were not neutral. They interpreted, adapted, and sometimes corrected earlier versions. Preservation came at the cost of transformation. The idea of an original text becomes fragile under these conditions. In many cases, the earliest surviving copy is separated from the author by centuries. Scholars work backward, comparing versions to reconstruct what might have existed. The book becomes a moving target rather than a fixed object. This is clearly visible in early religious manuscripts, such as the Codex Sinaiticus, where variations reveal how doctrine, language, and interpretation evolved alongside copying. Libraries become decisive at this point. They do not simply store books. They determine which texts are allowed to remain visible over time. Collection is a quiet form of power. When a library acquires a text, its chances of survival increase dramatically. When it is ignored, that text moves closer to disappearance. This process is never neutral. Religious institutions preserved theological works, states safeguarded legal codes, and schools repeated textbooks. Texts that did not fit these frameworks were copied less often, circulated less widely, and eventually faded from the record. Chance also plays a role that is uncomfortable to acknowledge. Some texts survived because they happened to be stored in dry climates. Others endured because they were reused, scraped, or overwritten, and later rediscovered. Some survived because they were forgotten in the right place. The survival of books is not a pure merit system. It is a mixture of intention, accident, and circumstance. By the time printing emerged in Europe, many texts had already passed through this filter. Printing did not rescue lost works. It stabilized those that remained. Once a text was printed repeatedly, variations slowed dramatically. Errors still existed, but they spread uniformly. Survival became more predictable, but also more rigid. A printed mistake could become permanent. Authority increased, but flexibility decreased. This rigidity changed how books interacted with time. A printed book no longer needed continuous copying to survive. It could exist as a fixed artifact, but this also meant that texts outside the printing system were left behind. Manuscripts that were not printed often faded from relevance. Survival became tied to technology. Books that aligned with the dominant production method endured. Others receded into obscurity. What emerges from this history is a sobering truth. The books we have today are not a complete record of human thought. They are a selection shaped by copying habits, institutional priorities, translation choices, material conditions, and chance. Every surviving book is evidence not only of what was written, but of what was allowed, supported, and preserved long enough to reach us. Understanding this does not diminish books. It deepens them. Each text becomes a survivor, carrying marks of the path it traveled. Words that reach us have already passed through many hands, minds, and decisions. The book you open is not the beginning of a story, but the continuation of one that almost ended many times. And this process does not stop. Even now, books continue to disappear. Formats change, languages evolve, archives fail. Preservation remains an active effort, not a completed task. A book survives only as long as someone believes it should. This is the quiet reality behind every shelf, every library, every preserved text. Books endure not because they are written, but because they are carried forward again and again. by people who decide, consciously or not, that they are worth saving. Some losses in book history are visible, named, and remembered. Others are silent. Among the most striking examples of disappearance is the dramatic reduction of classical literature over time. Of the thousands of plays written in ancient Greece, only a small fraction survived. Many works vanished not because they were rejected, but because they were never selected again. Copying required labor, time, and materials. In late antiquity, scribes increasingly favored texts useful for education, rhetoric, or theology. Philosophical dialogues, scientific treatises, and dramatic works that did not fit curricular needs were copied less frequently. Once copying slowed, disappearance followed almost automatically. A book that was not recopied for a few generations rarely returned. Some texts survived by accident, often in a single fragile form. One of the most famous cases is the Codex Sinaiticus, produced in the 4th century CE and rediscovered in the 19th century at St. Catherine's Monastery. Its survival depended on isolation. Stored far from major political centers, it escaped both destruction and revision for centuries. What we read today exists because that particular location remained quiet long enough. Single copy survival is more common than many assume. In medieval Europe, numerous texts existed in only one known manuscript. If that manuscript burned, rotted, or was discarded, the work vanished completely. The survival of the Roman poet Lucretius and his work De Rerum Natura depended on a single rediscovery in 1417 by Poggio Braccolini in a German monastery. Without that moment, an entire philosophical worldview would likely have been lost. Translation offered another path to survival, but at a cost. During the Abbasid Caliphate, especially in 9th century Baghdad, Greek scientific and philosophical works were translated into Arabic. Figures such as Hunayn ibn Ishaq preserved texts by translating them multiple times across languages. However, translation reshaped meaning. Concepts shifted, examples changed, and some ideas were clarified, while others were softened. Preservation did not freeze texts. It transformed them. Not all losses were ancient. Early modern Europe also witnessed large-scale disappearance. When printing standardized texts in the 16th century, many handwritten manuscripts were discarded as obsolete. Libraries deaccessioned works deemed redundant or unimportant. The very process that stabilized certain books accelerated the disappearance of others. Print culture narrowed the range of what was considered worth preserving. Environmental factors played a decisive role as well. Climate determined survival as much as culture. Papyri survived in the dry sands of Egypt, while similar texts in humid regions decayed quickly. This is why large portions of ancient literature are known primarily through Egyptian finds. Geography quietly edited the human record. In the modern era, preservation appears more secure, yet new forms of fragility have emerged. Digital texts feel permanent, but they depend on formats, hardware, and institutions that change rapidly. Early digital archives from the 1980s and 1990s are already difficult to access. Unlike paper, which degrades slowly, digital data can vanish instantly when systems fail or formats become unreadable. Even large institutions face this problem. The Internet Archive, founded in 1996, exists precisely because digital memory is unstable. Its mission reflects a recognition learned from book history. Preservation must be active. Storage alone is not enough. Continuous migration, copying, and verification are required to keep texts alive. What connects ancient manuscript loss to modern digital decay is not technology, but attention. Texts survive when someone decides they matter enough to maintain. When attention fades, so does preservation. A book does not disappear when it is burned or deleted. It disappears when it stops being carried forward. This means that survival is never guaranteed. Every book that reaches the present has passed through a narrowing corridor of chance, choice, and care. Countless others did not. The shelves we see today represent not the fullness of human thought, but what remained after time finished selecting. And that selection continues, quietly, even now. A book does not need to be opened in order to function. Long before widespread literacy, books already held authority, meaning, and social weight. Their power did not depend on being read, but on being present. In many societies, the mere existence of a book in a space altered how that space was perceived. A book on a table, a shelf, or an altar communicated stability, legitimacy, and continuity, even to those who could not decipher a single word on its pages. This is why some of the earliest and most influential uses of books were ceremonial rather than intellectual. In medieval Europe, legal oaths were often sworn on the Bible, despite the fact that most participants were illiterate. The book acted as a witness, not a source of information. Its role was symbolic, but the consequences were real. To swear on a book was to bind oneself to a shared belief system, enforced not by understanding, but by trust. The text itself remained closed, yet its presence carried unquestioned authority. The physical placement of books reinforced this role. In locations such as Westminster Abbey, books were positioned deliberately in visible, elevated, or restricted spaces. Height mattered, distance mattered, accessibility was controlled. These choices signaled that books were not ordinary objects. They were intermediaries between law, belief, and power. The book's silence amplified its status. It did not argue or explain. It simply existed as proof that something greater had already been decided. A similar dynamic appears in legal traditions outside Europe. In the Byzantine world, the Corpus Juris Civilis, compiled under Justinian I in the 6th century, functioned less as a text to be read continuously and more as a definitive reference. Judges and officials rarely engaged with it from beginning to end. Instead, it was opened at precise moments to confirm authority. The book's role was not narrative, but confirmatory. Its power lay in its fixed presence, not in its readability. This pattern reveals an important truth. Books often operate as social anchors rather than informational streams. They stabilize systems by standing still. A reference book does not invite immersion. It invites verification. Dictionaries, legal codes, medical manuals, and religious compilations share this characteristic. Their structure discourages linear reading. They are designed to be entered briefly and exited quickly. The act of opening them is more important than the act of reading them. In many homes, books fulfill a similar function. Certain books are kept in specific places, not because they are frequently read, but because their presence carries meaning. In Islamic households, the Quran is often placed on a high shelf or wrapped in cloth. The placement itself communicates reverence. Reading may occur occasionally or regularly, but the book's constant role is symbolic. It marks the space as protected, ordered, and aligned with belief. The book becomes part of the architecture of the home. This idea of books as spatial markers extends far beyond religion. In ancient Roman cities such as Pompeii, archaeological evidence suggests that scrolls and codices were stored in visible domestic areas. These collections were not hidden. They signaled education, citizenship, and cultural participation. To own books was to claim a place within a certain social class. Whether those books were read extensively was secondary to the fact that they were owned and displayed. The display of books as identity markers intensified in early modern Europe. By the 18th century, the private library had become a symbol of intellectual legitimacy. Shelves of books conveyed seriousness, discipline, and refinement. This tradition persists today. A room lined with books feels different, even when no one is reading. The books communicate potential. They suggest accumulated time and deferred effort. Their silence implies depth. Books also travel as social objects. For centuries, manuscripts and later printed volumes were exchanged as diplomatic gifts. In 5th-10th century Europe, illuminated manuscripts were presented between courts, not primarily for their content, but for what they represented. Craftsmanship, expense, and rarity mattered more than readability. These books were often admired, catalogued, and preserved, yet rarely read. Their value lay in their existence as objects of connection and trust. The idea that a book can be meaningful without being read challenges modern assumptions. Today, reading is often treated as the sole justification for a book's existence. Historically, this was not the case. Many books were created to be consulted, witnessed, or revered rather than consumed. Even now, certain volumes are opened only on specific occasions. Family Bibles recording births and deaths, ceremonial books used in graduations, and legal registers activated only during formal proceedings all function in this way. There are also books that gain power precisely because access to them is limited. Some texts were deliberately restricted, their contents reserved for a small group. The Book of Soiga, studied by John Dee, is one such example. Its perceived mystery was amplified by its obscurity. The difficulty of understanding it increased its perceived value. The book's unreadability became part of its identity. This dynamic highlights a subtle paradox. A book does not need to be understood to be influential. In some cases, misunderstanding, secrecy, or partial access strengthens its social role. Books that are too easily consumed risk becoming disposable. Books that resist engagement often endure as symbols. Their presence invites speculation rather than comprehension. Movement between spaces further alters a book's role. A book on a desk suggests work. The same book on a bedside table suggests reflection or comfort. In a courtroom, it becomes evidence. In a school, authority. In a place of worship, sanctity. The text remains unchanged, yet its function shifts with location. Books adapt socially without altering a single word. This adaptability explains why books have survived so many technological transitions. They are not bound to a single mode of use. A book can be read deeply, skimmed briefly, consulted occasionally, or simply kept nearby. Each mode serves a different human need. The object accommodates all of them without resistance. Over time, these roles accumulate. A book absorbs traces of its social life. Notes in the margins, worn corners, broken spines, and stains mark interaction. Even an unread book ages. Dust settles, paper yellows. The book records time not only through content, but through presence. It becomes a witness to the environment it inhabits. This is why books feel heavier than their physical weight suggests. They carry social memory. They have been trusted, displayed, sworn upon, exchanged, protected, hidden, and revered. Their silence is not emptiness, it is compression. Each unopened book contains not only text, but a history of expectations placed upon it. In understanding books as social objects, it becomes clear that reading is only one of many ways humans interact with them. Books organize space, signal values, stabilize systems, and create continuity. They do this quietly, without instruction. They do not demand engagement. They wait. And this waiting is not passive. It is active readiness. A book stands prepared to be opened, referenced, or simply acknowledged. Its role shifts with context, but its presence remains constant. This is how books embed themselves into human life, not by insisting on attention, but by offering reliability. As this section continues, the focus will move even deeper into how trust forms around books, how authority attaches itself to bound pages, and why societies continue to grant books a special status long after other objects have lost theirs. The book does not need to speak loudly to be heard. It has learned that standing still is often enough. Trust is one of the quietest forces books carry. Long before most people could verify information for themselves, books established a reputation for reliability simply by existing in fixed form. A spoken claim could change. A written one could be revisited. This difference mattered deeply in societies where memory was fragile and authority needed anchors. Over time, the physical stability of books became associated with intellectual stability, even when the content itself was contested or wrong. This association hardened with the spread of print. Once texts began to appear in identical copies, repetition created confidence. Seeing the same words arranged in the same way across multiple volumes suggested consensus, even when none existed. Print did not guarantee truth, but it produced uniformity, and uniformity felt trustworthy. A book that looked official began to function as official, regardless of who wrote it or why. Design choices reinforced this effect. Thick covers, formal typefaces, numbered pages, and structured layouts all contributed to a sense of seriousness. These elements were not neutral. They shaped expectation before reading began. A book that appeared carefully made was assumed to contain careful thought. This visual logic persists today, influencing how readers judge credibility long before engaging with content. Institutions quickly learned to harness this trust. Universities, courts, religious bodies, and states used books to formalize authority. Once a rule, doctrine, or theory appeared in book form, it gained weight. Disagreement did not disappear, but it became harder to challenge. To argue against a book required another book, or at least a written response. This raised the threshold of opposition and slowed change. The ritual use of books strengthened their symbolic role. Academic ceremonies still involve formal volumes carried, opened, or displayed without being read aloud. The presence of the book represents continuity with a long tradition of knowledge transfer. The content is secondary. What matters is alignment with an established lineage. The book stands in for accumulated agreement across generations. This trust extended into private life. Families preserved certain books across centuries, not because they were actively consulted, but because they anchored identity. Family Bibles recording births and deaths functioned as unofficial archives. Even when not read regularly, these books were protected, repaired, and passed down. Their authority came from endurance rather than use. Interestingly, books retained this status even when people became aware of their limitations. Errors, biases, and outdated theories did not immediately erode trust in the medium itself. Instead, trust shifted selectively. Certain books were questioned, but the idea of the book as a reliable container remained intact. The format survived criticism that would have destroyed less established media. This persistence reveals an important distinction. Trust in books is not the same as trust in information. Books are trusted as processes rather than guarantees. They are seen as having passed through filters: writing, editing, printing, distribution. Each step suggests review, even when none occurred. The perception of filtering creates reassurance, whether or not it is deserved. Modern digital culture complicates this dynamic. Screens deliver information faster, but often without visible structure. Text feels temporary, editable, and unstable. In contrast, books still signal closure. A printed page suggests finality. This difference explains why printed material continues to carry legal, academic, and emotional weight disproportionate to its actual accuracy. The result is a quiet hierarchy of belief. Information presented as a book is often treated as more serious than the same information presented elsewhere. This is not rational, but it is deeply ingrained. Books benefit from centuries of accumulated trust, built not through truth alone, but through consistency, durability, and restraint. Books do not merely store ideas. They train societies in how to trust. Over time, they teach patience, acceptance of delay, and respect for fixed form. Even in a world saturated with faster media, Books retain a unique authority, not because they are always right, but because they feel settled. That sense of stability continues to matter more than most people realize. A book becomes dangerous not when it is read, but when it is believed to matter. Throughout history, books have been treated as threats not because they contain noise or violence, but because they persist. A spoken idea can be denied, interrupted, or forgotten. A written one waits. It can be returned to. It can be shared quietly. It can outlive the moment that tried to silence it. This endurance is what turns books into objects of fear. The act of banning a book is rarely about erasing information. It is about controlling circulation. Authorities have long understood that ideas do not need to be correct to be influential. They only need to remain available. A banned book is not dangerous because of what it says on a single page, but because it can be opened again tomorrow by someone else under different conditions. The threat lies in continuity. One of the earliest systematic attempts to control this continuity was the Index Librorum Prohibitorum, first published in 1559. Its purpose was not subtle. The list named books that Catholics were forbidden to read, own, or distribute. The range was wide. Scientific works, philosophical arguments, theological disagreements, and political critiques all appeared side by side. What united them was not subject matter, but perceived risk. These were texts thought capable of reshaping belief without permission. Among the names that appeared on the index were figures now central to intellectual history. Works by Galileo Galilei were restricted because they challenged the established cosmological order. The issue was not observation, but implication. A book that suggested the Earth was not the center of the universe threatened more than astronomy. It threatened hierarchy. The danger was not the data, but the shift in perspective that could follow. Other banned books were feared not for challenging power directly, but for expanding thought too freely. The works of Baruch Spinoza were prohibited in multiple regions because they refused to conform neatly to religious categories. His ideas moved between theology, ethics, and politics without asking for approval. The fluidity itself was the problem. Books that resist classification are difficult to contain. In some cases, books were banned precisely because they were readable. Fiction, especially novels, became a recurring target in the modern era. Stories reached audiences that philosophical treatises never could. Works like Madame Bovary were censored not for explicit rebellion, but for subtle influence. The fear was not that readers would imitate characters directly, but that they would begin to imagine alternatives to their own lives. Totalitarian regimes understood this dynamic clearly. In 1933, public book burnings took place across Germany, organized to eliminate texts deemed un-German. Authors such as Erich Maria Remarque, Sigmund Freud, and Albert Einstein were targeted not because their books were unreadable, but because they encouraged independent thought. The spectacle of burning was performative. It was meant to demonstrate control over memory itself. Yet banning often produced the opposite effect. Forbidden books acquired a second life underground. They were copied, hidden, memorized, and shared in fragments. The act of prohibition signaled importance. Readers assumed that something worth hiding must be worth knowing. This pattern repeated across cultures and centuries. Suppression created curiosity. Silence generated attention. Some books were never officially banned, yet were treated as dangerous through informal restriction. In the Soviet Union, many literary and philosophical works circulated as samizdat, copied by hand or typewriter and passed privately. Ownership itself became an act of resistance. The book transformed from a source of information into a symbol of personal risk. Possession mattered more than comprehension. There are also books that were feared not because of politics or religion, but because of perceived moral influence. Throughout the 20th century, novels such as 1984, Brave New World, and Fahrenheit 451 faced bans in schools and libraries. Ironically, these books often explore censorship itself. They were banned for describing the very mechanisms used against them. Some bans were temporary, others lasted centuries. What they share is a misunderstanding of how books work. Removing a book does not remove the idea. It changes its behavior. Ideas under pressure adapt. They compress, fragment, and travel quietly. A banned book is no longer a public object. It becomes private, intimate, and often more influential. Books have also been hidden rather than destroyed. Manuscripts were sealed in walls, buried in jars, or stored in remote monasteries. The Nag Hammadi texts survived precisely because they were concealed around the 4th century and rediscovered only in 1945. What was once dangerous became historical. Time reversed the judgment. What emerges from these patterns is a consistent truth. Books are feared not because they shout, but because they persist. They wait patiently for the right reader, the right moment, the right question. Power prefers noise because noise fades. Silence, preserved in ink and paper, endures. Banned book is never fully gone. Its physical absence does not mean silence. Instead, it creates a negative space around itself, shaping conversation through what cannot be said openly. Readers speak indirectly. References become vague. Titles are whispered rather than named. In many cases, people know a book exists long before they know what is inside it. This awareness alone is enough to give the book influence. Absence turns the text into a question rather than an answer. History shows that banned books often circulate in fragmented forms. Passages are copied by hand, quoted from memory, or summarized orally. In the Soviet Union, forbidden texts moved through samizdat networks, reproduced on typewriters with carbon paper, each copy growing fainter than the last. Accuracy suffered, but presence remained. The text lived not as a stable object, but as a shared risk. Possessing even a partial version was enough to signal dissent, regardless of whether the book had been fully read. This pattern reveals something essential about censorship. Authorities rarely fear the literal content of a book alone. They fear interpretation. A book that can be returned to, reread, and reconsidered threatens fixed narratives. Unlike speeches or broadcasts, books allow private engagement. A reader can pause, reflect, and disagree in silence. This internal space is difficult to monitor. What unsettles power is not rebellion, but imagination operating without supervision. The repetition of book banning across cultures makes this clear. Religious institutions, monarchies, revolutionary governments, and modern states have all attempted to suppress texts, often for entirely different reasons. Yet the mechanism remains the same. Control the object, and you hope to control the future reader. Remove the book, and you believe the idea will fade. History suggests otherwise. Suppression tends to increase symbolic value. The banned book becomes a marker of forbidden knowledge, regardless of its actual content. Many books that were once prohibited later returned with little alteration. Political regimes collapsed, laws changed, moral standards shifted. The text remained the same. Works banned under one system were sometimes taught under the next. This delayed return gives banned books a peculiar authority. They appear to have survived a test. The fact that someone once tried to silence them becomes part of their identity, even when the original fear no longer applies. There is also a practical reason bans fail over time. Books are durable in ways policies are not. A law requires enforcement. A ban requires constant vigilance. A book requires only survival. It can wait decades, even centuries, until conditions change. Libraries reopen. Archives are re-examined. Private collections resurface. The text re-enters circulation without needing to adapt itself. Censorship, by contrast, must be continuously renewed to remain effective. This imbalance explains why books are uniquely unsettling to those who seek absolute control. A book does not argue back. It does not protest. It does not resist physically. It accepts removal without reaction. But it also does not disappear willingly. It remains intact, ready to resume its role the moment pressure lifts. In this sense, books do not oppose power directly. They outlast it. What ultimately frightens authorities is not what a book says today, but what it might say tomorrow to someone else under different circumstances. A book is a delayed event. Its impact is unpredictable. It can remain dormant for years, then suddenly matter again. That uncertainty is difficult to manage. And it is precisely this quiet persistence that gives books their longest-lasting influence. Bans rarely begin with the book itself. They begin with anxiety about influence. In many cases, the text is already circulating quietly before it is officially restricted. Authorities react not to widespread damage, but to the possibility of it. This is why early bans often appear disproportionate. A book read by a small group can still trigger suppression if that group is perceived as strategically important. Students, clergy, scientists, or writers have historically been enough to justify intervention. One of the most revealing examples is The Prince, written by Niccolò Machiavelli in the early 16th century. The book was not immediately banned everywhere, but it was viewed with suspicion across Europe. Its problem was not immorality or heresy, but clarity. It described power without moral framing. That transparency made rulers uncomfortable, even when they privately recognized its accuracy. The book circulated cautiously, often read discreetly by those in authority rather than publicly condemned. Some books were banned not because they challenged power, but because they blurred boundaries. On the Origin of Species by Charles Darwin faced restrictions in schools and institutions not for denying belief, but for destabilizing explanation. The threat lay in method. By offering a natural process where a divine one had been assumed, the book shifted how questions themselves were asked. It did not argue against faith directly, but it removed the need for certain answers. Literary bans often reveal even subtler fears. Ulysses was banned in the United States and the United Kingdom in the early 20th century for obscenity. Yet the real discomfort came from form rather than content. Its fragmented structure, interior monologue, and refusal to guide the reader challenged traditional authority over meaning. The book could not be easily summarized or controlled. That ambiguity was treated as danger. In other cases, books were banned because they spoke too clearly to ordinary readers. Uncle Tom's Cabin, published in 1852, was prohibited in parts of the American South. The fear was not intellectual corruption, but emotional alignment. Fiction could bypass argument and create empathy. A reader who felt differently might act differently. That possibility alone was enough to justify suppression. Some bans were geographically uneven, revealing how fear depends on context. Lolita was banned in France, England, and several other countries during the 1950s, while circulating freely elsewhere. The same text produced different reactions depending on legal systems, cultural norms, and public sensitivity. The book itself did not change. The surrounding society did. Books have also been banned retroactively, long after publication. Animal Farm faced restrictions in various countries, not at the time of its release, but later when its allegory became inconvenient. This delay shows that books do not expire. Their relevance can return unexpectedly, turning an old text into a new threat without altering a single sentence. In educational settings, bans often reveal generational tension. Books like The Catcher in the Rye and To Kill a Mockingbird have been repeatedly challenged, not because of explicit ideology, but because they expose young readers to moral complexity. The fear is not that students will adopt a specific view, but that they will begin questioning inherited ones. Modern bans increasingly operate through access rather than destruction. Removing books from libraries, limiting digital availability, or restricting curricula achieves suppression without spectacle. The book is not burned, but it becomes harder to encounter. This quieter form of censorship often escapes attention, yet it is highly effective. A book that cannot be found functions almost the same as one that does not exist. What all these cases share is a misunderstanding of how books influence people. Authorities often assume a direct cause and effect relationship between reading and behavior. In reality, books work slowly. They do not command. They suggest. They linger. Their influence accumulates over time, interacting with experience rather than replacing it. This slowness makes them difficult to regulate and easy to underestimate. In the end, banned books reveal more about the fears of a society than about the texts themselves. Each prohibition draws a boundary around what is considered safe to imagine. When that boundary shifts, the book often remains, waiting patiently to cross it again. Books do not force their way back into circulation. They simply remain available to return. For a long time, people have been predicting the end of books. Each new technology arrives with the same confidence, and each time the prediction quietly fails. Radio was supposed to replace reading. Television was supposed to finish it. The internet was meant to dissolve it completely. And yet, books remain. Not unchanged, not untouched, but unmistakably present. To understand why, it is necessary to stop asking whether books will disappear and begin asking what role they currently play. The modern book exists in a crowded environment. Screens are faster, louder, and more responsive. Information moves instantly. Text can be edited, updated, or erased without leaving a trace. In this context, the book appears slow and rigid. But this rigidity is not a weakness. It is the reason books still matter. A book does not refresh itself. It does not adapt to trends. It represents a moment when thought stopped moving and chose to stay. This quality has become increasingly valuable. In a world defined by constant revision, fixed text offers orientation. When something is printed, it signals completion. The author has finished. The argument has been closed. The reader encounters not a stream, but a boundary. This sense of finality explains why books continue to be trusted in law, scholarship, and record-keeping long after digital alternatives became available. Libraries understand this distinction clearly. National libraries across the world still require physical deposit copies of published works. In the United Kingdom, for example, the British Library preserves printed books alongside digital archives, not out of nostalgia, but out of caution. Digital formats decay quickly. Hardware becomes obsolete. Software changes. A printed book, by contrast, remains readable without mediation. It asks only for light and time. This concern is not theoretical. Early digital projects from the late 20th century already face accessibility problems. Texts stored on magnetic tapes, floppy disks, or proprietary formats are often unreadable today without specialized equipment. Paper ages slowly and visibly. Digital data can disappear instantly and silently. This fragility has led many institutions to treat physical books as the last stable layer of memory rather than an outdated one. At the same time, the definition of a book has expanded. Electronic books challenge traditional boundaries by separating content from object. An e-book can be duplicated endlessly without degradation. It can be searched, annotated, and shared across borders in seconds. Yet this convenience comes with a trade-off. This difference alters the relationship between reader and text. A physical book exists independently of permission. It can be lent, resold, inherited, or forgotten without external control. A digital book exists conditionally. Its presence depends on agreements that can change. This conditionality affects trust. Readers may appreciate speed, but they still associate permanence with weight, paper, and binding. The publishing industry has adapted unevenly to this reality. While mass-market fiction thrives in digital form, Academic and reference publishing continues to rely heavily on print. Scholars cite page numbers, editions, and physical locations because they anchor arguments. A citation assumes that the reference text will remain stable. This assumption is easier to maintain with printed material than with constantly updated digital files. Even new technologies designed to preserve knowledge often circle back to the book. Large-scale digitization projects scan printed volumes rather than replacing them. The Internet Archive, founded in 1996, digitizes millions of books but also stores physical copies. Its founder has repeatedly emphasized that digital preservation alone is insufficient. Physical books serve as the original reference point, the fallback when digital versions fail. Artificial intelligence has introduced another layer of complexity. Machine learning systems analyze vast quantities of text to detect patterns, summarize content, and reconstruct lost material. AI can compare versions, identify anomalies, and assist in restoring damaged manuscripts. Yet these systems depend entirely on existing texts. They do not replace books. They feed on them. Without stable corpora, AI analysis collapses. Interestingly, AI has renewed interest in older books rather than replacing them. Historical texts, once rarely consulted, have become valuable data sources. Digitized archives of early modern print, medieval manuscripts, and 19th century journals are now mined for linguistic, cultural, and scientific insight. Books once considered finished are being read again differently, for purposes their authors could not have imagined. This revival highlights another enduring feature of books. They tolerate reinterpretation. A book written for one audience can serve another centuries later. The physical object remains unchanged, while meaning shifts around it. This flexibility, without modification, is rare. Most media must be updated to remain relevant. Books wait. Modern reading habits reflect this shift. Many people no longer read books linearly. They consult, skim, revisit, and extract. Yet the book accommodates this behavior easily. Its structure allows entry at multiple points. Digital platforms imitate this flexibility, but they often sacrifice context. A book preserves the surrounding silence that gives ideas room to settle. There is also a psychological dimension to the persistence of books. Physical books engage the body in subtle ways. Weight, texture, smell, and spatial memory all contribute to comprehension and recall. Readers often remember where something appeared on a page, not just what it said. Screens flatten this experience. Everything occupies the same surface. Books preserve variation. This bodily connection extends to ownership. A personal library reflects time invested rather than content consumed. Unread books still matter. They represent intention, curiosity, and future possibility. Digital libraries, while vast, feel abstract. They lack visible accumulation. Books make time tangible. The economics of books also resist simple replacement. Printing remains expensive, but so does maintaining digital infrastructure. Servers require energy, updates, and security. Physical books, once produced, demand relatively little. They sit quietly, consuming no power, asking nothing. In an era increasingly aware of sustainability, this passive endurance becomes relevant again. Globally, book production continues to grow, though unevenly. Emerging markets invest in print education because physical books are resilient. They function without connectivity. They survive outages, censorship attempts, and technological gaps. In regions where infrastructure is unstable, the book remains the most reliable delivery system for complex information. Censorship has also evolved rather than disappeared. Today, books are less often burned and more often restricted through access. Algorithms determine visibility. Platforms decide distribution. Yet physical books remain difficult to erase completely. A printed volume can be hidden, shared, or rediscovered long after digital traces vanish. This resistance to erasure keeps books relevant in unpredictable political climates. What emerges from all this is not a picture of decline, but of repositioning. Books no longer compete with faster media. They occupy a different role. They are not streams, but anchors. They do not chase attention. They wait for it. In doing so, they preserve a form of engagement that remains irreplaceable. The future of books is therefore not a question of survival, but of function. As long as humans value stability, reference, and the ability to return to the same words unchanged, books will remain necessary. Their form may shift slightly. Their distribution may adapt, but their core purpose endures. Another shift shaping the modern life of books is how they are identified rather than how they are read. Systems like ISBN numbers did not exist until the late 20th century, yet they quietly transformed how books move through the world. A book is no longer only a physical object. It is also a traceable entity within global distribution networks. This numerical identity allows a book to be tracked, reordered, archived, withdrawn, or replaced without ever being opened. Standardization extended beyond identification. Page numbering, edition markers, and publication metadata now determine how books are cited and remembered. Academic systems rely on these markers to stabilize reference. Without them, a text becomes difficult to anchor. This is why printed books continue to dominate legal and scholarly environments, where precision matters more than convenience. A fixed page still carries more authority than a shifting screen location. Large preservation institutions responded early to this need for stability. The Library of Congress began systematic preservation programs, not only to store books, but to preserve their usability across time. Climate control, binding repair, and paper treatment became part of book survival. These efforts recognize a simple truth. Information does not preserve itself, even when printed. Digitization introduced new assumptions that proved unreliable. Early scanning projects treated digital copies as replacements rather than references. Over time, this approach changed. Digital versions are now understood as access layers, not originals. When scans degrade, become corrupted, or lose context, the physical book remains the point of return. Preservation strategies quietly shifted back toward redundancy rather than replacement. This logic explains why mass digitization projects rarely discard originals. Programs associated with Google Books scan millions of volumes, yet partner libraries retain physical copies. The digital image is treated as a tool, not a destination. Searchability improves access, but authority remains anchored in paper. Another modern development reshaping books is algorithmic visibility. Books no longer disappear only through physical loss. They vanish through invisibility. Recommendation systems, search rankings, and platform policies determine which titles surface and which sink. A book can exist in perfect condition, yet functionally disappear if it is no longer indexed or promoted. This is a new form of quiet erasure. Small publishers and low circulation books are most vulnerable to this process. Academic monographs, regional histories, and works in minority languages often fall below visibility thresholds. They are not banned, but they are rarely encountered. Survival now depends not only on preservation, but on discoverability. Being stored is no longer enough. This has led to renewed interest in decentralized archives. Projects like the Internet Archive aim to reduce reliance on single platforms. Their approach mirrors older book survival strategies. Copy widely, store redundantly, and accept imperfection. The goal is not flawless access, but continued existence. Artificial intelligence has complicated this landscape further. Texts are increasingly consumed by machines rather than humans. Books become datasets, stripped of sequence and context. While this enables large-scale analysis, it also fragments meaning. A paragraph extracted for pattern recognition no longer functions as part of a sustained argument. The book survives, but in pieces. Paradoxically, this fragmentation increases the value of intact books. When content is routinely broken apart, the unbroken whole becomes rarer. Scholars return to physical volumes to understand tone, structure, and intention. The book regains importance not as information, but as form. Its continuity becomes a feature rather than an inconvenience. Legal frameworks have also adapted unevenly. Copyright laws vary by country and era, creating uneven preservation. Some books enter the public domain and spread freely. Others remain locked behind rights management systems long after commercial relevance fades. The result is an uneven cultural memory shaped by legal timelines rather than historical importance. Education systems reinforce this imbalance. Curricula determine which books remain in print and which fade. A book taught repeatedly survives through demand. One removed from syllabi often disappears within a generation. Survival is tied not only to quality, but to institutional repetition. Books endure where routines support them. What becomes clear is that modern books survive through networks rather than isolation. Printers, libraries, algorithms, laws, and readers all contribute. No single factor determines endurance. The book continues to function as a meeting point between material stability and shifting systems, adapting without transforming itself completely.